welcome to the launch of Reshaping Plastics, a groundbreaking new report. For everyone who has worked on Reshaping Plastics, this is a very important and exciting moment. My name is Louise Beale, and I am a presenter and reporter here in the UK on Channel 5 News, and I will be your host for the next 90 minutes, and I will be joined by some of the brilliant people involved in making Reshaping Plastics. They will take us through the key findings before we have what's set to be hopefully a lively debate with a fantastic panel on the challenges and the possible solutions that lie ahead. Now, there will be time for you to get involved and to ask our panel and speakers questions. And we're really keen to hear from as many of you as possible. So please use the chat function that you should be able to see on your screen to get in touch with all of our speakers. We want as many questions as possible. Just if you can say who your question is directed to when you put that question in, that would be fantastic. Now, Reshaping Plastics comes 2 years after breaking the plastic wave. The report published by Systemic and the Pew Charitable Trust back in 2020. Its aim was to inform the global debate on plastic pollution. It used science-based analysis to quantify the economic, environmental and social implications of different global strategies designed to address plastic pollution in the environment. Now, today, Reshaping Plastic is launching with the same methodology and approach, but this time focused on Europe and on the pathways to achieve a system that is both circular and with net zero carbon emissions. The report also hopes to strengthen dialogue between industry, the public sector, investors, and civil society. Now, the work for this report was commissioned and financed by Plastics Europe, but it is an independent report that has been through rigorous governance to make sure that it is impartial. An independent steering committee was established, made up of a balanced mix of senior leaders across civil society, the public sector and industry, and an expert panel was assembled to ensure accuracy. All of which I think you'll agree with me is very good to know. Now, that is enough from me, and I'd like to get things started. And for that, let me introduce Mr. Jyrki Katainen, the chair of the steering committee and president of the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra, and former European Commission vice president and former Prime Minister of Finland, to share his opening remarks. Jyrki, let me hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Louise. Also on my behalf, very warmly welcome to the launch of Reshaping Plastics report. Ladies and gentlemen, Reshaping Plastics is a practical and ambitious roadmap for all stakeholders to improve the circularity and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of the European plastics system, and quantifies the economic, environmental, and social implications of this transition. It's driven by the conviction that a new and shared evidence base is required to plot the science-based pathway to address current systemic challenges in the plastic system. Plastics contribute huge value to the European society and the economy. They have become a fundamental part of our daily lives and enable the functioning of almost every sector. However, we have been benefiting from the virtues of plastic for many years without adequately managing their climate and environmental impact. Recently, the need to urgently redress the situation has been raised as priority from across stakeholder groups, creating the imperative to act. Reshaping Plastics was commissioned by Plastics Europe, but was developed throughout last year, overseen by a fully independent steering committee, of which I was the chair. Commissioning this report was a courageous act by industry in order to confront head-on the most challenging issues faced by the European plastics system and work towards a science-based solution, but doubly so by relinquishing control of the analysis to an independent third party. As chair of the steering committee, I was able to ensure balanced voices from across industry, civil society, and public sector were voiced and heard in the definition of this report analysis and the articulation of its findings. We were supported by an expert panel who reviewed the accuracy of assumption and methodology. Circularity and net zero emissions must go hand in hand. Unlike previous reports, ReShaping Plastics addresses the main European challenges of circularity and net zero carbon emission simultaneously. This report provides an excellent view from our vantage point at the start of the 2020s on how we can shift trajectory towards the kind of system needed by the next generation in Europe with the technologies we have at our disposal today. New breakthrough innovations will occur, new policies will be enacted, other sector developments and geopolitical shifts will change the rules of the game. Today's launch is just a start of a bigger and longer conversation that will need to adapt as the landscape changes, but will ultimately lead to the same goal: a plastic system that has reinvented itself and renewed its relationship to the environment, climate, and society. In the coming years of this decade, a series of decisions will present themselves to the key system stakeholders, many of them present here today, that will determine down which pathway the system transition will occur. Many of these choices will present risks and challenges to them, to their organizations, and to the lives of the people that depend upon them. They will often be very hard choices and made in uncertain conditions. It is these individual choices that will accumulate to determine which of the scenarios described in this report becomes the future of the European plastic system. The writing of the report is only of value if our system decision makers embrace its findings and exhibit strong leadership in the face of adversity and make the hard choices in order to shift from our current trajectory. I believe we now have the tools and knowledge at our disposal to begin upon the journey towards a high circular net zero plastic system in Europe, and in doing so, establish Europe as a pioneer within the global economy, as an example that will inspire other regions to follow suit. Therefore, I urge those of you here today, especially leaders in political and business, to exhibit that strong leadership in the coming years to help turn what is described in these pathways into a reality. I would like to thank all of the many participants who have collaborated to bring ReShaping Plastics to this point, and to all those who have helped make today's launch possible. It's been a pleasure to oversee this development, and I look forward to hearing the rich discussion I'm sure it will stimulate amongst the plastics community in Europe. So once more, thank you very much for all who have contributed to this analysis paper. And Louise, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jyrki, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of everybody involved in this report for those remarks and for joining us today. It was fantastic to hear from you, and you've given us plenty to think about. I'd now like to share a message with you all from Dr. Markus Steilmann, the President of Plastics Europe. He couldn't be with us, but here is a message from him for you all.
Thank you, Louise, and hello everyone here today. A warm welcome from my side too. Today is a remarkable day for plastics and for the plastics industry. It is also a great day for many other sectors and millions of people across Europe. Why? Because all of us are committed to fight the climate crisis. Because preserving the natural foundation of life continues to be of utmost concern. And therefore, our industry has the vision to create a truly sustainable plastics economy in Europe. A system with net zero emissions and with zero waste in line with our continent's big project, the European Green Deal. That is why we commissioned this independent report from Systemic. Now it is here, and the good news is our vision could become reality. The ReShaping Plastics report, after thorough assessment, offers a range of scenarios how to get there. And therefore, we are glad to have these findings, which are based on scientific evidence and we welcome them. The conclusion is simple. It is that fundamental changes are needed, including a huge system transition of our industry. Of course, I know we do not yet have all the answers to the challenges we face, given the complexity of an integrated plastic manufacturing sector. And we also cannot realize the vision alone, but we must and will continue to accelerate on this route. Our members are already doing a lot. They have been investing heavily to significantly reorganize their production and technology bases. In particular, we want to advance chemical recycling. Therefore, we know that there is planned investments that will be increased from 2.6 billion euros in 2025 to 7.2 billion in 2030. We do this because we do not close our eyes to the environmental impact of plastics. On the one hand, it's a wonderful material, beneficial and indispensable. But at the same time, it comes with environmental challenges. Our industry accounts for 20% of the chemical sector's EU-wide greenhouse gas emissions. It generates almost 26 million tons of plastic waste in Europe each year, but the recycling rate is only 14%. So there are many reasons to step up our efforts now and quickly and comprehensively. It will take vigorous efforts across the value chain, and it will not work without support from governments and civil society. To support the report's call for more intense and effective collaboration and in line with the suggestions this year, we want to initiate a new multi-stakeholder platform. And we call on policymakers for a new EU policy framework that gives us better incentives for investment and innovation in a rapidly evolving world. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to an exciting discussion on a very important report.
Well, thank you very much to Dr. Markus Steilmann. Fantastic to hear from him as well. Now, for the moment I suspect you have all been waiting for, let's hear more of the report's findings. And for that, I would like to welcome the founder of Systemic, Professor Martin Stucktai, and Trishla Shah, Lead Circularity Analyst at Systemic. Martin, I know you're in Namibia. We spoke a little bit earlier and you showed me the very beautiful view you have, which is much better than the one that I've got here in rainy old England. But it's lovely to see you, and I will hand over to you at this point.
Thank you. Quite a moment. Can I be heard well, Louise? So let me get started. Trishla and I were quite looking forward to be able to present these findings to all of you today. A, because it's always nice to look back on work done, but B, also, we felt that there's something itchingly unreconciled in European plastic. And the industry is too large to our economy, it's too essential to our lives, and it's too significant in our climate and resource equation to rest well without being able to describe the industry pathway. Everyone participates in this conference today because we somehow feel drawn to plastic, everyone in a very individual way. I myself grew up with the pride of a German Mittelstand family that was proud every time they switched on a new extrusion machine. But then at the same time, there was growing unease about what plastic can do if it goes unmanaged. You all know these moments that you can describe years later, the scenery, the sight, the odor. What you see on the picture is Munca. It's a beach in East Java, Indonesia, the site of the STOP project. It's not in Europe, but lots of the plastic has been designed and has been sold by European companies, so the site matters. It's sites like these that have triggered the work that we have done over the last 15 years on the circular economy, together with many fellow travelers and some of them participating in the conference today. Not least, it led, Louis said it, to the Breaking the Plastic Wave report more than 2 years ago, together with Pew Charitable Trust, which is based on work that we published in the Science Journal. It tried to describe how a plastic industry without environmental pollution could look like and how it could thrive. We were surprised by the positive reception at the time across countries, across languages, and therefore we were very excited to apply the methodology to the European plastic industry, this time to find the pathways into circularity and into net zero. But we all know it, we all feel it. Since 2020, when the first report was written, the world has moved on. Industry voluntary momentum has strengthened, particularly around Alan's 2025 global commitment, more than 1,000 signatories, I believe. Europe has specified the Green Deal with a climate law, 2030 targets for 55% emission reductions, the Circular Economy Action Plan, multiple directives relevant to the plastic industry. We have seen a spree of innovation and start to see what a fully data-empowered plastic value chain could look like. We now have a plastic playbook or a climate playbook from Glasgow, a global 1.5 degree commitment, 2,000 companies signing up to science-based targets, many of them from the chem and from the plastic industries. Further, in March this year, there has been the United Nations Environmental Assembly setting course towards a 2024 global agreement on plastic pollution. And then we are experiencing an unprecedented supply side shock for many commodities, especially for inputs to the plastic industry, especially in Europe. It started before the Ukraine, but the war places us in the middle of a perfect commodity storm on top of the unspeakable human suffering. Extending fossil fuels or to make sure we have supply security or accelerating the move away from them. That's one of the headlines conversations that we are in the middle of in Europe right now. Now, everyone understands in plastic, the future is not the present. So many thrusts abound on how to change the plastic system. Some propagate massive reduction or bans. Others propagate substitutions through materials that make it easier to manage the materials post-use. Others are offering chemical recycling almost as the silver bullet that returns plastic into something useful. Again, others propagate alternative feedstock that decouple plastic from emissions altogether. All of these stand unreconciled, and we do not really understand how do they pan out environmentally, economically, socially. What do they cost? How much to invest? How do they really align with our climate goals? How quickly can they be implemented? That's why we were quite excited when Plastic Europe triggered this work and to find pathway for the industry that end the night flight. That's what a good and proactive industry association, by the way, should do, and you did it. We agreed with all participants up front that the work must be around solutions, not the problem, that it needs to optimize for both climate and circularity, that it needs to take a full system perspective, end to end, and then over again. And it needs to be data and fact-driven and needs to be impartial. With that, of course, the team setup mattered. To ensure impartiality and a science-based approach, a steering committee and an expert panel, Louise, was established, the EU, NGOs, industry, recyclers, consultants, academics. Let me quickly pause and thank all of them for the level of insight, the level of sincerity, the level of energy, the level of collaboration. We've written many reports in our lives, but the spirit really stands out. We use that assembled brain power to address 5 questions. A, what is it really that we are solving for? What is expected from the plastic industry? What's the starting point, 2022? How to go circular, and then how to go from circular to net zero. And in the end, who will win? What is expected from the plastic industry solving for? Could we not just continue to operate as an industry to drive volume growth and whilst exercising good and social environmental citizenship? The answer is no. 2 things in particular are forcing us to think beyond incremental change. It's industrial emission reduction targets that we have set for Europe, 55% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And secondly, circularity, anchored in the Circular Economy Action Plan and various related directives. So what's the starting point that we have against those North Star visions in 2022? Today, we aren't either. We are neither circular nor are we climate neutral. In Europe, at least 25 million tons of packaging with household goods, automotive, construction plastic, which is the scope that we have chosen for this work, turn into waste every year. Only 3.5 million are recycled, typically mechanically. 12 million tons are incinerated. 7 million tons are landfilled even today. 2 million tons are exported and often lost out of sight, let's be clear, and 500,000 tons are littered. In short, we are an 86% linear industry. It could become worse, in fact, if we look deeper into the numbers, because there might be waste actually missing from the official statistics. The total annual plastic production, which is the broader scope, all plastics in Europe, is over 50 million tons, whilst less of 30 million tons actually arrive as waste. So there's a 20 million tons gap. Even when we account for plastic in use in our economy, there seems to be anything between 12 million and 50 million tons of plastics missing in the waste statistics. Whilst this analysis is probably imperfect and based on assumptions, the message is very clear. Industry and regulators need to find that plastic because you can't turn circular what you can't monitor. Now, that has started to trigger reactions from legislators to voluntary industry actions who are working on multiple initiatives to improve our system. What we did in this work, we tried to analyze what all these initiatives would come up to. By 2030, if all commitments were implemented, circularity would increase from 14 to 30%. Conceitedly, that is a significant leap, but given the overall market growth, the amount of linear, especially incinerated plastic, would increase and not decrease, and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the plastic industry would stay flat at best. So in summary, current commitments are good, but they fall significantly short of the goals of the Circular Plastic Alliance, European Green Deal, Paris, Glasgow, and so on. With that, how do we go circular? In order to answer this question, we applied a scientific methodology. I said it before, the one that we published in Science. We built and tested the so-called wedges model. We used 4 material streams, as I said, packaging, household goods, automotive, constructions. We allowed for 6 circular pathways, and we applied very rigorous tests, an affordability test, a performance test, and a consumer acceptance test, a sustainability test, and a technology readiness test. So, and with that methodology, the alternative to the current commitment scenario that I just talked about is a world in which 51% is circular in 2030 and 78% is circular in 2050. So by 2050, we think, meeting all of those tests, 25% can be simply reduced, that is eliminated, such as avoiding over-packaging, reused, such as the water bottle that some of you might have on their desk right now, or transferred into new delivery models, dispensers, refilling stations, etc. 4% can be substituted largely by coated paper or by biogenic materials. 27% can be mechanically recycled if we have a better design for recycling. And 21% can be chemically recycled, plastic to plastic. That translates into over 3 million tons by 2030, 7 million tons 2050. Out of the remaining 22% that is linear, 18% will go to fuels or to heat. Now, how to read that outcome? As a consumer, you have reason to like it because their needs for the utility, so the function, the benefit that what today consumer plastic provides will actually be fulfilled, partly non-material, partly non-plastic, and partly plastic circular. For governments, it's good because the growth of volumes is controlled, and that makes it easier to handle waste management problems. But even for industry, I would argue it's good because the overall market grows, but only in those wedges where you are investing into reduction solutions, substitution solutions, circular solutions. So let's be clear, plastic from virgin without any mechanism to manage a safe post-use fate, that is a shrinking market, and we need to speak out on that. So in a way, you could sort of perhaps slightly optimistically say that circular scenario is an El Dorado for a plastic industry that is able to build recycling value chains, to innovate, to rethink business models. It is a world where industry can thrive and keep their social license to operate. So is everyone happy? Potentially, yes. Not so yet the Global Climate Collective, because we have concluded it's 1.5 degrees. Circularity will bring emissions down by 64% in that scenario. So let's be very explicit. Going circular is the most powerful, the most economic, the most immediate emission reduction lever that we have available in the system. It's at our fingertips with existing technology solutions. And yet the Global Climate Collective will need more than that. So we try to find out what is it that we need on top of circular in order to transition into a net zero world. Trishla, that's for you.
Thank you, Martin. So circularity is clearly the fastest, most reliable and most effective means of reducing emissions in the European plastics system. But as we've just seen, there is still a large emissions gap to be bridged. And so how do we take it from a circular system to one that is net zero as well? And this is where the systems change scenario comes in. To bridge the gap to net zero by employing emissions reduction technologies. And here we explored two different pathways. So one pathway was to retrofit the existing system infrastructure. For example, by adding carbon capture to steam crackers and to incinerators, and by using green hydrogen as an alternative fuel source. This is definitely a more capex efficient route to reducing emissions, as it avoids stranding assets. A second and more fundamental shift builds on the retrofit scenario, employing the same set of levers, but actually going a step further and beginning to decouple plastics production from fossil fuels by turning to alternative sources of carbon feedstock. So, looking at the outcome of the retrofit scenario first. On the left, the chart shows that in addition to the 59% of demand that is met by circularity levers, 22% of steam cracker production is abated using green hydrogen as an alternative fuel, and 14% by adding CCS, so capturing and sequestering the CO2 emissions from steam cracker production. Together, this reduces the unabated virgin fossil production to only 5% of the total plastic utility demand. And the aggregate effect of this is a 73% reduction in the emissions, as shown by the graph on the right. Yet, as you can see from the dark green wedge, virgin production still remains the largest source of residual emissions by 2050. And so ultimately, retrofitting the system falls short of closing that emissions gap to net zero, and it risks locking the plastics system into a production model that is fundamentally incompatible with a net zero world. Now turning to the net zero systems change scenario, which, as its name suggests, set the industry on a plausible track to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. So building on the retrofit scenario, this pathway employs the same set of levers, but actually goes one step further by beginning to displace fossil fuel feedstocks with alternative sources of carbon, namely biomass and captured CO2. You can see from the graph on the left that with these additional levers, this leaves no unabated virgin production by 2050. These technologies provide a source of negative emissions, as you can see on the graph on the right, which, when scaled to be equal to the residual emissions in the system, brings the system to net zero. So while some of these technologies are more nascent, if they are to scale, this shows that reaching net zero emissions is possible for the European plastics system, but it is not given. It will require bold innovation, early investment, major infrastructure overhaul, and targeted policy support. So now if we bring all of the different pathways together, this chart shows the emissions on the vertical axes and circularity on the horizontal axes, displaying the trajectory of each pathway over time. Here you can see that it really is only the net zero systems change scenario in dark green, which meets both the EU's 2030 and 2050 climate targets. All other scenarios fall short, which just demonstrates the level of ambition and the level of radical transformation that is required by all actors in order to meet these targets. So how much will this cost? Our analysis shows that the net zero systems change scenario requires a comparable investment to our current action scenario, so the current trajectory we are on. As the system becomes more efficient, capital that would have been deployed to continue building out virgin production capacity is instead diverted to building circularity and emissions reduction infrastructure. So in terms of the scale of capital redeployment required, it's about 1 in 4 euros in the system that will need to be redirected to circularity and emissions reduction technologies from existing uses of capital. But what's not shown here is the 300 to 500 billion euros of additional investment that would also be required to scale green hydrogen and to build out the carbon capture and storage infrastructure that is needed. These more nascent technologies and models inherently carry greater risk compared to existing uses of capital. So this scenario requires significant support in the form of targeted policy support, but as well the development of financial instruments to de-risk the deployment of capital in this space. So there are many key numbers relating to the net zero systems change scenario that I've rattled through very quickly, but I would like to draw your attention to just 4. Ambitious application of circular economy principles drives levels of circularity in the system to 78%, up from just 14% today. Together with the emissions reduction levers, this avoids 1.6 gigatons of CO2 emissions between now and 2050. This, however, doesn't mean a shrinking of the European plastics system. Instead, it results in a net job creation, with 160,000 new jobs being created by 2050. So this level of system circularity and the deployment of these emissions reduction levers also means that the industry's dependence on fossil fuels is significantly reduced, with a 70% reduction in virgin fossil plastic demand by 2050. And so through a combination of both ambitious circularity and emissions reduction levers, the European plastics system can set itself on a trajectory to net zero by 2050. Thank you, everyone. I'll now hand it back to Martin to talk through what is required to put us on this trajectory.
Trishla, thank you. By the way, not just for the presentation, but also for all the excellent analytical work that you and the team have performed. There will be a moment to celebrate all that. Let me turn to the last question. Who will win in this completely new context that Trishla described at a moment where we seem to have reached an inflection point? Let me offer 5 strategic plays which are most promising to generate tomorrow's winner companies. And you might test your own level of ambition against them. There is the play of winning in plastic reduction, those companies that are able to incorporate new reuse models, that are able to design packaging-free products, that are able to help extend the lifetime of their products and to design business models around them. There are those companies that actually excel in chemical recycling, that are very good in advancing their technology, in helping to shape lawmakers, to provide political frameworks, who are able to scale infrastructure and to build the supply chains that are needed to bring feedstock economically back to the recycling infrastructure. There are those who actually take innovation leadership on next generation technologies, like exploring fossil fuel alternatives when it comes to feedstock that are going into advanced sorting. Then there are those who will win through being able to forge next generation partnerships with others in the GHG sector, securing green power, securing themselves through this green hydrogen, connecting with those who are able to design and install carbon capture and storage. And finally, those who actually take a system perspective and become system architects, for example, by transitioning the plastic value chain into a 21st century digital plastic system where we have item level traceability on all the stocks and all the flows. In order to master what surely will be a centennial reset as an industry, however, more is needed than individual company action. There is need for concerted action, potentially around these 10 points. And they all have something in common. All of them need to be pulled in together in order to work. You can't just pull one of them. All of them need joint action, government, NGOs, consumers, and all of them have a particular role to play for industry, but also for industry associations such as Plastic Europe, who triggered this conversation. Such a program of concerted action should focus on helping the lawmakers to define the right incentives, mandatory targets for recyclates, extended producer responsibility, harmonized collection, rapid scale up of renewables. Secondly, helping the lawmakers to create fairness in international trade so that those who are dumping the climate consequences and the environmental consequences don't have an unfair advantage. Third, helping lawmakers to provide transparency to consumers so they can make better choices and that it's easier for them to access systems like deposit return. Fourth, by getting ready to act jointly, for example, through creating something like a plastic systems transformation body. We have seen that work very, very powerfully in other industries. Then by earning credibility by driving transformation consortium transformation project yourself, upstream, downstream, around circularity, around climate, and everywhere in between. And then finally, by providing risk capital or by providing infrastructure capital so that this change can actually be funded. Pulling this off will feel quite different than the work done by executive boards, management teams today. The unit of change this time around is not the company, it's not the product, it's the plastic system altogether. Now, let me come to a close. Whatever your individual role or stance in Europeans' plastic story may be, I guess we will agree that for the last 70 years, the plastic industry was one of the best yardsticks available to measure economic progress and prosperity. And if the European plastic industry finds the strength to transform itself ahead of the problem, that journey can continue for decades to come. Thank you, Louise.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Trishla as well for all of that. Really, really useful and really helpful. I think everyone will agree. And now, before we go on to our panel, just a reminder to say that you can put your questions to Martin or Trishla a little bit later when we get to that stage in proceedings and to our panel. But also just to say that we know that was a bit of trouble hearing some of Dr. Marcus Steilman's address. Apologies for that. You can see the whole thing again after this on Systemic's website or on YouTube. So you will be able to see his full message there, but apologies for that interruption. So now it is time to move on to our panel to discuss well, everything that we've been hearing so far and really get to the nitty gritty of it. So I'd like to introduce them. And we have Emmanuel Mayer, Head of Unit at the European Commission, Virginia Janssens, Managing Director of Plastics Europe, Jean-Marc Simon, Executive Director at Zero Waste Europe, Dr. Martin Young, President of Performance Material Division at BASF, and Miguel Vieira Pastana, Head of Corporate Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer at Reckitt. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us. It's fantastic to have you all here, and I know you've all got plenty to say, so we're going to get through as much of it as possible. Again, another reminder to the audience, do feel free to put your questions in, and just remember to say who your question is directed to when you put them in on the chat function that you should be able to see on your screen. So I want to start with you, Emmanuel, if I can come to you first. As we've been hearing, Reshaping Plastics is, well, it's surely a wake-up call, perhaps we could call it, to stakeholders to do more and to do more faster. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I think that the wake-up call happened some time ago already, when we were all shocked by the impacts of plastics at seas, on biodiversity, and we really felt a very, very strong shock in the public opinions in Europe and beyond. And at that time, we also realized that there was a lot of potential in circularity. And this is why, and Martin has explained that before, we issued the plastics strategy back in 2018. And we reaffirmed in the context of the European Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan that we needed to press for reforms. This being said, I think that the report is a piqûre de rappel, as we say in French. It's really a booster shot to transform more quickly and more profoundly the linear economy of plastics. I mean, the status quo is clearly not an option. We have a number of initiatives at the European Commission which are in the making. They were not yet taken into account in the report for very good reasons. And so I think there are more opportunities to move towards more circularity. And I think that the great systemic approach to both circularity and climate change is really, really precious. So I really would say yes, a big booster shot to transform our economy. Thank you.
Emmanuel, thank you. And I like that analogy. It feels very apt in the time of COVID to talk about boost arm shots. But Virginia, can I perhaps put the same question to you? Do you think this is a wake-up call for industry, and how ambitious can they be to follow with some of the scenarios that are in the report? Oh, no, we can't hear you at the moment, Virginia. If you can just demute for us, that would be fantastic.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you. That's much better. Much better. Go for it. Tell us.
No, I was just actually already thanking the Emanuela, because it was encouraging to hear her response, and of course the Commission is one of our critical partners in our joint journey towards net zero and circularity. So I'll start with saying that as Managing Director to Plastics Europe, I am very proud that we commissioned the Reshaping Plastics report. And we requested it because we recognize the severity of the climate crisis and the challenge of plastic waste. And we support the report's central findings. I think Martin also hinted at it. The faster and systemic change is essential. Circularity and the circularity approach is a key driver for the short and medium term transition to net zero. So speaking of a 2030 horizon, and that more intense, effective collaboration between all parts of the plastic system, including policymakers, is vital. And Louise, so to return concretely to your question, I regard this report as an extremely valuable tool to help inform and guide the business decisions of our member companies. But it's also intended as a guidance for the wider system, our stakeholders, the policymakers, as we explore those pathways together. So our members are already investing and innovating to support the EU's net zero and circularity ambitions already for a long time. And this has indeed accelerated in recent years. It is a challenging period for our industry, but it's also very exciting to be in this industry right now every week I personally read and talk about public announcements from our members about changes, innovations, partnerships that are taking place. Perhaps just very concretely, I'll name a few. Converting captured and recycled carbon emissions in personal care packaging, for instance, or it was already referred to earlier in the net zero system change scenario. There's the first electrically heated steam cracker furnace, so using renewable energy instead of fossil fuel. Or indeed advances in plastics recycling from end-of-life vehicles in partnership, of course, with the automotive value chain. So these are just a couple of examples. But of course, behind those announcements, let us not forget that far-reaching reorganizations of the production and technology base is taking place as we speak, and of course, requiring huge investments and risk-taking. So this also means that often the more tangible or market or societal facing benefits take time to filter, given these longer investment cycles. So, but the report is clear with a wake-up call, I would say, linked to the when. Now is the time to accelerate the system change. And we have, as Plastics Europe as well, today set out a package of measures and policy priorities to help achieve this acceleration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And I can see quite a few of our panel nodding along there with what you're saying. Jean-Marc, can I come to you just to pick up on some of that? But obviously, Reshaping Plastics, it recommends much more ambitious actions for policymakers and industry. What in your mind is actually needed to achieve a circular economy for plastics at scale in Europe?
Yeah, thank you, Louise, and thanks for the fantastic study. The previous speakers have mentioned it already. I think that policy making as usual and business as usual is not an option anymore. I think there is a wake-up call, clearly, and we are. I think this study actually is a fantastic framing exercise to move from, or like we have plastic pollution that we need to address, but of course plastic pollution is a result of a linear economy for plastic, and we were trying to change that with circularity, with net zero. I think that is correct, and I think the study actually does a great work with that. I just think that in order to advance for circularity, there's still a third piece, a third element that is missing if we are going to be using this going forward, and it's the fact that actually plastic needs to be a safe material to use when it comes to health impacts, but also technical properties when it comes to recirculating materials. And this is an aspect that has not been considered in the study, and we have discussed this. I mean, this is made explicit, but clearly it can have an impact in the development of this material if the growing evidence about the impact of that plastic polymers or additives can have on human health or technical properties when actually recirculating this material in the economy. So for me, one of the challenges is really how do you marry the chemical strategy with actually the fact that you want to make it circular and net zero going forward. And this is not easy. It's easier to model circularity or net zero than to model actually the impacts that are actually not very well known. We just see scratching the surface. So that is one point. On the circularity, my second and last point, I think that the study does very well in actually identifying potential solutions. Some of them are higher risk, less proven, and also more expensive. Therefore, some others, as circularity solutions, are cheaper and kind of off the shelf. So I hope that in the coming years we're going to see really focusing on what is proven, on what is available, and really that we can scale up quick. And there is a note of caution. We've heard a lot about nation technologies that we still need to, I think, know. I mean, chemical recycling. We're not against chemical recycling, but we need to see whether pyrolysis can actually be run at a environmental and economic fair cost. So there's still question marks there, and I think that we need to put things in perspective and push for one things first.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Yeah, putting things in perspective, it's a good thought. And Martin, may I come to you next? We've obviously been hearing voices saying the industry isn't moving fast enough to address circularity and reduce emissions. How can industry leverage some of the exciting innovation to move faster?
Thank you very much, Luis, for the question. And first of all, I would like to reiterate and underline what Virginia said before. The fact that we have this study is also a sign that this wake-up call that has been mentioned before for the plastics industry is actually happened. And Emmanuel, I think she also referred to that one. It is really a clear sign. And this study, thank you for that one, helped us really also in the association and amongst members to see better how these different paths can help us and what is the benefit or actually the hurdles in this path. You heard before that it is not a silver bullet. It needs quite a portfolio of technologies. Some are more explored, some are less explored. I think Jean-Marc, you also mentioned that one. But therefore, it also needs a kind of a staggered approach how to use them. I think if you look at the numbers very clearly, it is reliant on the mechanical recycling to improve big time in terms of volumes that are moved. That needs better sorting technology, which comes available. It needs better cleaning in order to have purer streams. It needs design for recycling in order to have simpler material that can be mechanical recycled, because we should not fool ourselves. Mechanical recycling these days is very often a downcycling of the material. And that is something that can be helped. So that's a big impact. You saw it in the numbers that Trishla have shown us. Then next is chemical recycling, less explored. Jean-Marc, you talked about this one. Yes, a lot of question marks in the air. Different technologies that are at this point in time explored. It's the depolymerization, it is pyrolysis of waste streams. It is in the end also gasification, but all of them can have their value, and we need to better understand it, and we should address those with a very open mindset. And that would be my pledge here, an open mindset in order to make best use of those technologies. Then it's about renewable feedstock. They can also play a role. Renewable feedstocks, I always say there's also a caution to renewable feedstocks. For renewable feedstocks, we should be extremely careful looking at the full life cycle analysis end to end, that we're not doing things that might be adverse in the end. So a caveat on the renewable feedstocks. And then in the end, it comes to the bigger part, and Trisha showed us very clearly, the decarbonization of the processes. And those are a lot of technologies that are, number one, investment heavy. At a second time, not all of them totally technology explored, but all of these technologies are explored by our member companies in universities and so forth. So there is a lot of momentum, and it's about, for instance, hydrogen-fired crackers, electrification of crackers, the use of carbon capture and storage that also has been a lot debated in Europe. Yeah, how much do we want to make use of that one? As well as carbon capture and utilization, where we in the end turn carbon back or CO2 back to useful molecules. So a lot of that is in exploration. A lot of that is currently also in investment. And there is a certain time path. I think the time path that's depicted in this study is pretty adequate and helps us to place these thoughts and their levers in the time frame. So all in all, I think a very solid basis for all of us to discuss and see where we put our bets. Thank you very much, Louise.
No, thank you. Indeed. I want to just pick up on one thing you mentioned there, chemical recycling. And Virginia, just come back to you. There are some industry players who may see this as a silver bullet. Do you agree, or what are the limitations of it?
Yeah, thank you, Louis. And it is a highly debated and highly topical discussion, and as we already saw today in this panel. But so to put this question to context, and referring back to the systemic report, one of the conclusions there was, okay, there is limited scope for achieving the net zero transition by substituting plastics with other materials. Another one is that it highlights the role that plastics plays in delivering emissions savings in many sectors of the economy. And we also support, and it was already stressed many times, the conclusion that circularity must be the key driver of system emissions reduction in the short to medium term. So how do we achieve this? And then we come to the levers and the solutions. Chemical recycling as a technology is undoubtedly a game-changing technology. It makes a vital contribution to driving circularity, as we can read in the report. We also view it, as Plastics Europe also viewed in the report, it's complementary to mechanical recycling, and it has two distinct advantages. The first one is it can treat waste streams that would otherwise be incinerated or sent to landfill. And secondly, it's the only method available for certain plastics. For example, it can be used for certain applications which cannot always today be dealt with by mechanical recycling, such as certain food contact packaging or indeed in pharmaceutical packaging. And investments in the technology continue to accelerate. We've launched a member survey a year ago or so. It's in the public domain, where we actually gathered figures for our membership. By 2025, 2.6 billion euro will have been invested in this technology, and by 2030, this number will have reached 7.2 billion euro. But it is important to recognize that chemical recycling is still a nascent technology, and by itself, chemical recycling is not the silver bullet. We need all up and downstream levers. This also includes using biofeedstocks, design for recycling, design for reuse, using renewable energy, and improving mechanical recycling and chemical recycling is indeed also recognized as part of the solution there. I find often in this debate, and also Martin hinted at it, that the open mindset, it's centered around the approach that we need to take on an attitude towards innovation and industry in Europe. All those nascent technologies, the net zero innovations, are inherently uncertain. And I'm pleased to see that at least it's not holding back our members that are investing in this technology despite not having all the answers yet or the enabling framework. And that is, of course, a concrete call now to the Commission to help us as fast as possible with setting this enabling framework to support our industry to further innovate and rapidly evolve in this technology, but also more globally as we are, of course, competitive on that level. Let me just close by saying let us remain technology neutral rather than championing one solution over the other or another. And give us some time as well as a nascent technology to prove ourselves. And at the same time, of course, we will need to nurture and stimulate further technological improvements, for instance, in lowering the environmental footprint of those technologies under chemical recycling.
Okay,
so I'll stop here. There might be some more questions.
Well, I'm conscious I've not come to Miguel yet, but I actually just wanted to just come back to Jean-Marc to pick up on some of that, because obviously some organizations they're publicly opposed to chemical recycling. But we're talking about the fact that it may have its place despite some limitations. What's your view?
Let's say chemical recycling, I think it's a great idea, but we need to see if it works. And we are looking for this proof of concept. I know that the industry is investing lots of money into this. We see that chemical recycling has a role to play for concrete applications where mechanical recycling is not suitable. And of course, we are in favor of exploring any options from divert plastic from incinerators and landfills. So on that we agree, but still, we are very interested in all these experiments to see what is the evidence there. And a quick point on the investment. Virginia has said it, like 2.6 billion euros going into chemical recycling in the coming years. That is impressive. How much money is going into reduction and reuse? I can tell you it's not 1/10 of that. And who is going to invest this money? And that is the low-hanging fruit, right? That goes back to what I said before. There's stuff that is proven, that is available, and that we know that the price. It might be expensive, but we know how much it costs. Nobody is investing in that, almost. In comparison to like a nation technology that I agree, it deserves time, it deserves a bit of investment, etc. But let's put things into perspective. We are investing into something we don't know what it is, and we're not investing into proven solutions. So that would be my comment to start with.
Yeah, thank you. nicely highlights the kind of difficulties with it, I guess. I want to just shift the conversation slightly now, and Miguel, come to you and ask you, what do you think that brands like Reckitt can do to support the transition to a more circular, climate neutral plastic system in Europe? What can be done?
Okay, well, thank you. It's always good to go last. And having heard from a lot of my colleagues on the panel, look, I think the first thing to say is we're a consumer-facing company, which puts what we do very much at the heart of how the people who buy and use our products. We sell 20 million of them every day. One of the things I think that we haven't really talked about that much is consumer behavior and consumer acceptance. So we've talked a lot in the last 20, 30 minutes, and in fact at the beginning of the sessions, around the need to invest in technology and infrastructure. And of course, that is absolutely correct. We do need to look at that. And the accelerator has definitely got to be there. We are, in some ways, because we're a branded company, we look ourselves through our own value chains, and we've made our own commitments. So we have our own 2030 commitments, and we use something called a sustainability calculator for all of our brands. And we've made a commitment that says 50% of the net revenue from our business will come from those more sustainable brands, as well as saying there's a 50% reduction in the use of virgin plastic. So we have to look upstream to all the companies, some of whom are here, who are going to enable us to deliver that in terms of the way that we source the innovation pipeline for the raw material inputs, polymer science, lots of the new innovation pipelines there. But also it's critical to see it from the lens of what happens when we then convert that into a product that we then market to a consumer to buy. And we know that 75% of our embedded carbon sits in the use phase and in the way that then what that person does with that product themselves, but also what happens at the end of life. And so our role is to increasingly going to have to be to incentivize behavior shifts, changes in behavior, and to make those systemic in the same way that we're talking about the upstream enablers of this. So I not to distract the conversation, but just to underscore the importance of that, I think, as well, in the debate that we're having. We're part of a research study. We looked at 30 countries with a partner called GlobeScan, and they looked at the difference between what people say they are willing to do from a sustainability perspective and then what they really do. And there is a gap between what they say and what they do. And our job, and part of our job, has got to be to bridge that gap, to make that gap smaller, because that really does require us to reinvent marketing. Because marketing at the moment has encouraged people to buy something and use it. It hasn't incentivized circularity yet. So there is a huge job for a company like mine to do in providing that, to be that driver of the education, the behavior shifts that are required for this system to truly become circular. And my only last observation is that we've also sort of touched on, but not yet dived that deep on, which is the role that data plays. And just how little, in some cases, there are data gaps. We saw that from the research itself, identifying significant data gaps. But also key to this is the ability to have full traceability through the life of a product, right through the life cycle. And we're going to have to do that SKU by SKU in our case. That's part of our net zero contribution. And the role, therefore, how we use data, deploy data, how it gets integrated through value chains is something else that we have to address. So I liked the systemic approach to the 10 enablers. I really like it because actually what it says is you can't pull any one lever. You have to effectively work on all 10. But just in the spirit of this conversation, I felt we've talked about 3 or 4 of the levers more than perhaps 2 or 3 others that I've just highlighted.
Okay, Miguel, thank you very much indeed. Emmanuel, I saw you nodding along to some of that. I don't know if you want to pick up off the back of it, but I also wanted to talk about the global plastics treaties negotiations and, you know, how you're preparing for that. But why don't you comment a bit on what Miguel said first?
No, I completely agree that helping the consumers to design this circular plastic economy is key. When we discuss, for example, how to design the sorting of waste, so that consumers know what to do with specific plastics. This is very, very important. So the information which is conveyed from the companies, but also from the public authorities, is very much in our minds. For example, also in the context of the review of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. And the role of data also has been really highlighted also in the context of the new eco-design for sustainable product regulation. This proposal was presented by the European Commission last Wednesday, and focuses also on the role of digital product passports. So traceability there is also of big interest to us. But maybe, Louise, just to come back to what happened in March at the United Nations for the Environment Assembly, because it has been a big success in Nairobi, Kenya. Mm-hmm. I mean, having the possibility to launch the negotiations of a legally binding treaty to combat plastic pollution globally is huge. This does not happen every day. And for the European Union and its member states, it was really an important result. This was actually our goal from the Circular Economy Action Plan back in 2020. And we have put significant efforts throughout the years in outreach activities, and we work with partners to build that support. So what we see is the need for a legally binding global instrument, which will probably include legally binding and non-legally binding provisions, addressing the full life cycle of plastics. And this was critical for the European Union, addressing it in the marine environment, but also in other environments. So that was also extremely precious. So we see this agreement as closing the gaps that exist in existing initiatives and agreements. And there is also a possibility to bring together all stakeholders to achieve the overall goal to eliminate plastic or the leakage of plastic in the environment. We will be particularly vigilant on the prevention, on the proper design and production of plastics, on the resource efficient use, followed by the sound management when it becomes waste. We also have great opportunities to identify standards, measurable goals, and monitoring requirements. So how do we monitor globally the plastic pollution, including marine litter, and how do we assess the impact in all environmental compartments? So again, we engage in that negotiation very strongly. In the coming weeks, there will be a meeting of experts preparing for the big negotiating committee, which will be set up in the second half of 2022. And the mandate, which was agreed in Nairobi, gives us a 2 years period to come up with a global agreement on plastic. So again, it's a fantastic opportunity, and I think it's very good to have the report today also to feed into our thinking. Thank you.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Martin, can I come to you at this point? I know you've covered some of this, but how will you use this report, I guess?
Now, first of all, again, this report is a big encouragement for all of us that this net zero is possible. I think that's really one of the big outcomes of that study, and it shows us ways in this direction. And I also want to come back to Miguel's point that this is not only about plastics industry here, it's about a huge amount of stakeholders there. I don't want to divert of the responsibility of plastics producers, but of course it is a complicated and long system, a long value chain where everybody plays a role. And absolutely right, we've seen it also in the study, reduction is one of the biggest levers. reduction is one of the biggest levers. So how to come to reduction? Again, it has to do with design, system design, as well as also consumer behavior. And we're all consumers at the same time, yeah, as being part of that panel here. We're also consumers and we can question our own behavior. But let me come back, perhaps what we can do, and we set this study out as plastics producers here. And now we personally, I can talk about our efforts also as a company. We looked at this report and again, and saw what kind of measures do we have now in our portfolio, and how does it link to that study? And we are working now concretely on improvement of mechanical recycling with new additives that can have better traceability. We work on pyrolysis for chemical recycling with partners. We work on closed loops for mattresses, automotive parts, also with partners, in order to have closer loops for a couple of materials. We try to get access to hydrogen through methane pyrolysis, which has a lower carbon footprint compared to other hydrogen winning technologies. I talked about the electrification, where we have a pilot project with Linde, and also CCS now with the Belgian government. We're trying to do a pilot project at our Antwerp site. So all these kind of technologies fit quite nicely in this roadmap. We try to place them also in terms of their effect. But in the end, I think also we realize, also for a company, it is important that we have distinct targets for ourselves where we work against and have a kind of a roadmap. We have our CO2 targets for 2030 and our net zero for 2050, and also recycling targets. So we try to translate, if you like, this entire roadmap into our company roadmap, and work down with concrete measures, projects, partners, customers along this way. This is how we use it practically. And I know from our colleagues in Plastics Europe, everybody does the same. Everybody has a little bit of a different portfolio and end customers, but we try to make this roadmap now part of our company's roadmap, and by this come closer to the targets.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And you mentioned obviously consumers in there. Miguel, can I come to you to discuss, well, consumers and their willingness to participate in a transition, particularly in a post-COVID world? How can we help consumers ourselves, play their part?
Well, in some ways, I think that consumers, and we are all consumers ultimately, they do expect us to help them solve the problem. So designing it out, reducing through innovation, using the ability that we have to look at formulation, to look pack size, all of these things when it comes to packaging, because obviously we're talking about sectors here. So automotive, construction, I'm talking to my own particular sector in consumer goods. So there's an expectation on us that we will play our part in enabling this to happen. But for example, if we move to refills, so we're piloting a series of models at the moment, testing models at the moment, where we can move to more of a reuse or refill model. So we have something called Lysol Smart, it's one of our brands. You can reuse the same bottles 25 times over. That has a 75% reduction in plastic. But actually incentivizing people to use that and make that choice in store, in a live situation, is actually, there's still a gap. You think that people would do it, but actually they don't necessarily do it. So there's a piece here which is about awareness, education, and also incentivizing. So rewarding people for doing the right thing is something we should definitely be talking about. But our job, in a way, is to, one of the powers of marketing as a concept is that you can actually create stories, connections, build the ability to influence behavior. So that's one of the things we can bring to the table. But in the real world, people have to I still think there's a bit of a gap between people's aspiration, people's stated objective, and what they really do in a real world environment. And that's, of course, we're talking here about Europe, but I think we need to understand that when you're talking about this from a global perspective, the situation that people find themselves in is very different. And so you have to localize these solutions. They're not just transferable. You can't apply the same thing everywhere and make it uniform. It has to be very much built to the environment in which people live, and the infrastructure that's available in the country in which they are residing. and it's not the same.
Yeah.
So this is one of our challenges. It's also the opportunity, as I said, we have. I think the good news is that most companies I know, all the companies are looking to do this. This is, for us, it's about how we embed it and operationalize it. So at the moment, the conversations we're having internally are more about acceleration of execution. It's no longer about should we do this or can we afford this. This is really about recognizing that it's just going to and just is part of the way that we do business. Now, how we do that, there is still a feeling, and it's one I am nervous of, which is that the pace at which we need to move, the accelerator has to probably go faster. And I think that is recognized, is that there's more that we can do faster. So it's not a lack of willingness, it's perhaps the pace that's the question, I think, in most people's minds is, are we doing enough quickly enough? But some of the unlockers are because of these interdependencies that we've talked about. There's an interconnected value chain and there's an interdependent value chain. So the ability for us to make progress in some ways is also defined by what our partners can do and what governments and regulators, the enabling environment that's created. So everybody kind of is looking at each other. And that was also in the report, which is we just need to be better at joining it up in ways that we don't currently join up, because it's not just a consumer play. You have to look through the entire value chain to deliver the solution to the consumer at the end. So that's something we just have to work on together. And maybe we just have to have regular booster shots, as we all believe we will be having regular booster shots, just to keep making sure that we're staying on course.
Thank you. No, that's great. I'm sorry. I'm conscious we've got a lot of questions coming in from the audience, so I want to start putting them to you all. And I apologise because I don't think we're going to be able to get through them all. And actually, if the panel, if you can keep your answers fairly succinct, so we can answer more questions, I'd be grateful. But let's start off. We've had a question from Ludo, and this is to Martin and to Miguel. But based on these findings, what would you want to see from the finance industry to support the infrastructure transition? And related to that, Gerald asked how we will reward fast movers versus laggards. So, Martin, can I come to you first? What would you like to see from the finance industry, and how can we reward fast movers? Martin.
Now, the finance industry can surely help to facilitate the big infrastructure that is needed. And if I talk about big infrastructure, it's first and foremost renewable electricity that is required in Europe, a huge amount of renewable energy that is required. So that's a play for utilities, but perhaps also for financial investors. The same is true for hydrogen. A lot of these technologies rely on green hydrogen in the end, also as a form of energy. Also, that one is surely a play that is interesting for financial investors, I guess.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Miguel, what are your thoughts on those?
Well, finance industry, capital flows. So it's the acceleration of capital flows is really essential. And also cheap capital, lower cost capitals, that would certainly incentivize people to shift faster. In terms of fast movers, I would tell you one thing that we want to see is obviously those that move further forward faster. Positive procurement could be a really big driver. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're always talking about private purchasing habits and behaviors, but there's a lot of state or non kind of national enterprise positive procurement that could drive a lot of this change and reward the fast mover.
Okay, thank you both. Another question from Heinz to Emmanuel. To make this work, how do you see the importance of key players to go in the same direction?
Well, I think it's absolutely essential. We have seen a very good example of how to move together at European Union level with the Circular Plastics Alliance. This is an alliance which was established about 3-4 years ago. And for the first time, we were able to move the entire value chain towards one goal, which was to produce 10 million of recycled plastics by 2025. But not only the production, but also the uptake. And so this has been a great opportunity to make sure that everybody comes around the table and discusses how to get there. You know, from the design for recycling to the investments needed towards this specific challenge. I guess that today's report will be again a good call for more enterprises to commit to the Saint-Calin Plastics Alliance objectives. And so building on that, I think would be really precious. There is another platform I would like to draw your attention to, which is called the Saint-Calin Economy Stakeholder Platform. And there you have many organizations promoting circularity in different value chains across the European Union. And we see that the plastic industry is a bit absent from that platform. So, you know, already advertising today's report on the Saint-Calin Economy Stakeholder Platform would be really critical. That's the way, you know, how we can connect the dots according to the interest of everybody. So two good examples of what could be scaled up.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. I'm going to go on to the next one. It's a question for Virginia from Meta, who says, in light of EU 2030 targets, what are the concrete near-term policy recommendations to exploit the circularity potential for plastics?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think overall, in terms of the immediate policy recommendations, and we have been calling for this in the last years or so it shouldn't really come to a surprise, but it's really important that this enabling overarching policy framework is there that truly incentivizes investment and innovation. And what do we mean with that? Please let us still invest and keep a very strong and harmonized EU single market. The 27 markets united and moving in the same direction with the same policy objectives, properly implemented and enforced is indeed very powerful and needed, and a needed force for the scale that we also need in this whole transition that we are currently in. The availability of high quality feedstock, the access to affordable, sufficient, renewable, low carbon energy are also key. And we will certainly be working with the Commission to see how this enabling framework can also help us in this regard. As Plastics Europe as well, what we will do next as well is we will be developing a roadmap for our industry, also focusing more in detail on the policy recommendations and also in dialogue with the Commission and our stakeholders to see where we have those levers from the policy side to help us in this transition. We already, as Plastics Europe, have started with specific product-specific regulations. For instance, you might have seen our call for 30% recycled content take up in the Packaging and Waste Directive, or in the future one that will be launched soon. So these are the elements. Also in alternative feedstocks, there is also initiatives from the Commission that we are supporting. So it's underway, but more will be needed to connect the dots among circularity and climate regulation. So we will certainly be in contact with the Commission to make sure that this is all joined up, and so we can really focus on circularity and net zero together.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. I'm going to whistle on to the next one. It's for Jean-Marc from Larissa and Erwin. How do we ensure investments go upstream first? Reuse requires big investments, and how do we ensure to keep the material value in the economy?
Well, I would say that you need like legal certainty. I mean, you look at today at the EU policies, it's all about waste. There's a bit about eco-design. There's literally no EU policies when it comes to reuse in comparison. Like Packaging Waste Directive is all about single use for the moment. It's not much about reuse. So it's a matter of like setting targets. Where do we want to go? What quotas do we want there? But also like enabling the right standards, and again, the innovation or the investment in the infrastructure, because as Miguel was saying, here the consumers don't have a choice and don't have the incentives. We're trying to change the system. You're going to need to change the infrastructure. and change the consumer experience. And that's not something that you do with only one company going this direction. You need actually to align the policy drivers with also with the industry. And I would say that, yeah, that's really important going forward.
Okay, lovely, thank you. We've just got time for a couple more questions, but Helga to Miguel, she says you talk about changing consumer behaviors faster. Is your company shifting big budgets in that direction?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, with my hat as Chief Sustainability Officer, no. I would like them to do a bit more faster, of course I would, if I'm being brutally honest. But yes, I mean, the strategy that we have is that each one of our brands, and we have 14 what we call power brands, so these are the truly big global brands that drive most of the revenue stream of the company. They all have their 3 to 5 year strategic plans, which have embedded this within the core strategic plans. And everyone in that, everyone is effectively starting from this premise that we discussed already around how do we look at this through the lens of avoidance, so using less in the first instance, and then looking at reuse. That's a place where we do need to step up. I think most companies are still in what I would call the pilot phase for testing that with consumers and trying to get the learning and the insight before you go to scale. And there are, a number of us, and not just my own company, but you can see that already on the shelves from a range of different consumer goods businesses. And then we move into making the products and designing the products in terms of looking at alternative solutions in some instances. But similarly, starting to think about the recyclability and the ability to use recycled content within that. So everyone is looking across the spectrum. We're looking at that through each brand, and then we have to roll that out globally. So this is the other challenge: is that obviously we're here to talk about Europe, but we look at this through a global footprint. And so some of the choices you also make are where do you go, because you can't do everything everywhere at the same time. So some of that has been the driver of the decisions that we've been making. But yes, we have stepped up. Would I like it there to be more? Of course I would.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I just want to finish with a question for all of you. And if you can give me an answer in 2 sentences, that would be fantastic. But are you optimistic for the future, having digested this report? And if so, why? Miguel, I'm going to spring that on you first.
Gosh, I was hoping I'd go last again.
Sorry.
Am I optimistic for the future? Yes, I am. I remain optimistic.
Good, great, nice answer. Thank you very much. Emmanuel, can I come to you next?
I think that there are several elements to be optimistic. First of all, there is a strong demand from public opinion in Europe, and I think beyond. And I think that at the European Union level, we have the ability to set the framework conditions and to support strongly the international dimension. I think that all the different agendas are gearing to the same direction. We mentioned circularity, climate change policies, but if you look at zero pollution or biodiversity protection, I mean, we can decline the need for a different plastic economy for all of these big political priorities. So there is a strong awareness and commitment. And I think there is also a strong awareness from the industry of the need also to work through a value chain approach. But it has been said by the industry, we need to scale up precisely that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Jean-Marc, how about you? Optimistic?
Of course. Also realistically optimistic. I think that we, as it has been said, we align on where we want to go. And if the question is really the how, I think it's already a good starting point. But yeah, worried, but optimistic.
Virginia, can I come to you next?
Well, hearing all of the other speakers, our key stakeholders, I'm extremely optimistic already with their responses. And let me just say how we've worked on this report as well the last year was simply fantastic. In an open, trustful, respectful manner, we could agree on a set of agreed scientific evidence and towards shared objectives across all of the key stakeholders. So if we can do that, we can certainly now speed up, accelerate, and get on with it. So yes, but very positive.
Good. And last but not least, Martin.
Yeah, sure. I'm optimistic because the study shows us reshape the plastics. So this is a call for reshaping the plastics. I think we have seen, number one, there's a strong willingness in consumers. Miguel talked about this. Now the consumers also have to subsidize that to a certain extent. And there's a strong willingness in the industry and the value chain. So there's also in Europe a huge innovation power. And this innovation power actually we should unleash. And if we unleash all the power along this value chain and also watch our competitiveness, there's all good reasons to be optimistic and positive, and jointly can manage this reshaping the plastics.
Fantastic. Okay, I am going to have to bring things to a close there, but thank you very much indeed. And thank you to all of our panelists and all of our speakers for everything that we've heard today and that conversation as well. We're very grateful indeed. To you watching this, we hope you found this launch useful, informative and inspiring. Certainly there does seem to be a path forward and hope for the future, as we've been saying. But as our panelists were also saying, it will take ambition and some collaboration. You can read the full report on systemic.earth, that website systemic.earth, and you can watch this back again, as I was saying, on YouTube. Thank you very much for being with us. Bye-bye.